welcome everyone who is watching this right now, who is going to be watching this right now when Ralph posts this, whenever he posts this. Today, I just wanted to share a really quick presentation on neuroplasticity after stroke. And the reason why I wanted to share this presentation was because back when I first had my stroke, there wasn't a lot of information around neuroplasticity. And this is basically what I would have given my younger stroke survivor self if I could go back and be able to have a conversation with them to prepare them for their recovery after stroke, really arm them with the knowledge of neuroplasticity, which would make life a lot easier in recovery after stroke, and I guess eliminate a lot of the struggles which I otherwise had to go through getting to this point where I know what I know now. So just a quick introduction to who I am. My name is Lowe. I'm a former OT student or occupational therapy student. Basically, I was studying to become an occupational therapist a couple of years ago in university. And while I was studying, I was also helping other stroke survivors on the side. And this was around the time which I went on Facebook and was doing this. And while I was studying, I realized that a lot of the things which they were teaching at university, it didn't really align with what I believed was best for a stroke survivor. For example, what a stroke survivor wanted most. And I felt that the university system was quite fixed in the way they approached, I guess, treatment for stroke survivors in their recovery after stroke. And now I am a stroke recovery coach, and I offer remote sessions for stroke survivors around the world, helping them to recover after their stroke. And basically what I do is I help them by teaching them how to modify their exercises so that they can recover a lot more after stroke. I help stroke survivors who have reached a point in their recovery where maybe they're noticing that maybe they're not seeing as many improvements as they used to, and they feel that they've come at a standstill in their recovery or a plateau in their recovery after stroke. I'm also the founder of WilliamLoweStrokeCoach.com. However, I don't recommend that you visit my website at the moment because I'm making some changes at the moment, so it's under maintenance. And I'm also the founder of the Stroke Survivors Community Facebook group as well, which is down here. So now that we've gotten that out of the way, I just want to go through some of the things which we'll be covering today. So what I wanted to share today is the 4 rules, which I believe, in my own opinion, that every stroke survivor should know when it comes to neuroplasticity. This is what I believe that every therapist should tell you, or every neurologist or physiatrist, as you might call it in the States, should tell you when it comes to recovery after stroke, to help you, I guess, better understand what you're up against when it comes to recovery after stroke. And after I've shared the 4 rules, which I believe that every stroke survivor should know, I'm also going to be sharing ways to actually apply what I've shared to maximize plasticity and get the most out of your recovery. And after I've shared some specific examples of how to do this and why it is that they actually work in recovery after stroke, I'm hoping that myself, Ralph, and Joe, we can have a discussion about other things which I might not have had the time to cover in this presentation, because the examples and the things which I'm sharing in this presentation, they're really only the tip of the iceberg when it comes to things you can do to maximize plasticity without having this slideshow go over like 3 or 4 hours, go over 1 hour and go to 3 or 4 hours. Everything I'm sharing with you guys in this presentation, it's a compilation of 9 years of personal research, of a ton of trial and error, and a ton of just research on my part, personal research on my part, just really trying to figure out what works and what doesn't in recovery after stroke, and observing things as I did them. So now that I've shared what I'm going to be covering, I wanted to go through the 4 rules of recovery after stroke. So this is basically your basic neuroscience, which which I believe that every stroke survivor should know. And these 4 rules of recovery were basically discovered by this really famous Canadian psychologist back in the 1900s, who was really interested in how humans learnt new things regardless of stroke. And his name was Donald Hebb. So Donald spelled D-O-N-A-L-D, Hebb spelled H-E-B-B. And he was behind this theory called Hebbian learning, which was basically this idea that whenever humans, or whenever the brain wants to learn a particular type of skill or thing, it goes through a specific process, and it follows 4 specific rules. And these rules, which he discovered, are basically the ones which I'm going to be showing right now. So the first rule of recovery is pretty much common sense, and I'm sure a lot of you might have heard about it. It's called use it or lose it. Yeah, it's called use it or lose it, which is basically the idea that once you get something back in recovery after stroke, it isn't permanent. Once you get a movement back in recovery after stroke, it's more than likely that the next day your brain's probably going to forget that little bit of movement which you got back, and you're only going to be able to justify it to your brain to keep it if you keep practicing what you get back. Because how your brain remembers new things in recovery after stroke is a lot different to how your brain remembered things before you actually had a stroke. So that's basically the first rule, and I'm pretty sure everyone's heard of that one, but I thought that it might be wise to include it otherwise. Now, the second rule, which this guy came up with, is this idea that neurons fire together, wire together, which is basically this idea that the more often you perform a movement, then it's more likely that the connections in your brain are likely to get a lot stronger, which goes hand in hand with use it or lose it. Having said that, the third rule is enriched environment, which is basically a fancy term which he used to describe this thing which Ralph has talked quite a lot about, which is the idea that therapy is around you. And basically, enriched environment means that if you surround your brain in an environment where you're doing a lot of therapy, or where you're exposing yourself to a lot of stimulation or social interaction, your brain's actually more likely to learn things a lot quicker. They've done a lot of research in people who haven't had a stroke, and they found that people who exercised a lot more often and people who had a lot of social interaction, they were actually able to learn things a lot quicker compared to other people who didn't have as stimulating of an environment. And having said that, they've also done studies where they've had 2 rats in different environments. So they've had 1 rat in just a normal cage where there was nothing to do. It was just filled with sand. And they had another cage with a rat where they had not a rat, but a hamster. And they had a hamster wheel, and they had other activities to do. And they found that the hamster who was in the cage with the hamster wheel and all these different things to do, when that hamster wanted to learn a new task, it actually learned it a lot quicker compared to the hamster who had nothing to do and was just stuck in the cage by itself. And so that's basically the third rule, enriched environment, which is basically another way, or basically the fancy way of phrasing what Ralph has always said: therapy is all around you, which this psychologist discovered is crucial to learning new things when it comes to brain recovery, or when it comes to, I guess, learning any new skill with or without a stroke. And the last one I also thought was really important, which is mindset. I think that mindset plays a huge role in recovery after stroke. I would say that it plays 90%, 90% of stroke recovery. And the reason why I say this is because if you don't believe that you'll recover, it's probably not going to happen. I mean, athletes who train for the Olympics, obviously they believe that they can achieve a certain thing before they actually do it. And for some of you who might have been listening to what we've discussed in the last couple of weeks in the roadmap, you might have noticed that we've talked a lot about mindset and how crucial this is to recovery after stroke. So those are basically the 4 rules of recovery, which I believe that every stroke survivor should know when it comes to recovery after stroke. And I think that this is the minimal amount of neuroscience every stroke survivor should know as well. Now, having said that, just knowing these 4 rules will not help you in your recovery after stroke. It really comes down to application. Rules on their own don't work if you don't know how to apply these. And more often than not, it's not actually. I might actually do this in. Let me see. I might actually do this in slideshow mode. Yeah. So what I meant to say was, more often than not, it's not what you do in recovery after stroke. It's not what exercise you do in recovery after stroke, but how you do an exercise and how targeted it is to your situation, and other factors that determines success in recovery after stroke. And lastly, I just want to mention that there's no such thing as a lottery ticket success approach to recovery after stroke. There is no one and done exercise you can do which will allow you to wake up the next morning and you'll be able to do the things which you used to do before you had your stroke. It just doesn't happen like that. But more or less, it's about little small gains done over a long period of time. But after you take a look, after a year or after a couple of months, then you're actually able to see the progress happen. Okay, so now that we've gone through a little bit of the main things to consider when it comes to recovery after stroke and really how the brain recovers, let me see if I can go back to. Oh no, I can't. Actually, I'll just go to the next slide because this is yeah, okay. So now that we've covered I guess the basic neuroscience which every stroke survivor should know, I just wanted to go through what happens when you just do exercises in recovery after stroke without actually making any changes and applying these said rules in your recovery after stroke. So if you were a stroke survivor and you're attending therapy, which is paid for your insurance, and you were just doing exercises week by week, the same exercises week by week or month by month, this is basically what happens. So what happens generally in recovery after stroke, and what I found is that whenever you do a new exercise, you might see that you'll get the most improvements in the first month. But after the first month or so, if you keep doing the exact same exercises and you don't apply these rules, these rules which I mentioned earlier, then your brain pretty much gets to a place where you're not seeing changes as much as you used to. Or maybe you feel like you've come to a standstill. And the reason why this happens is because in recovery after stroke, your brain needs a lot of stimulation, like I mentioned earlier, and a very enriched environment to really justify to itself why it should recover a lot further. The reason why you get to this point in recovery after stroke where you're not seeing as many changes as before is because your brain has pretty much reached a point where it's gone on what I like to call autopilot, and your brain has just been doing the exact same exercise over and over again. And because nothing's changed about the way you do it or how you do that exercise, like I mentioned before, it's not what you do, it's how you do it. then there's no justifiable reason to your brain why it has to work a lot harder to improve in its recovery after stroke. And it pretty much just flatlines here. And if you're someone who hasn't had a stroke and you're just going day by day, this is pretty much what your life is before your stroke. In other words, no one is, I guess, no one is exceptional when it comes to daily things, unless you've got like superhuman dexterity, but rather you're just doing things the exact same way and you're not becoming any better at it unless you're specifically training that thing which you're doing. So in recovery after stroke, this is basically the typical scenario which happens. And this is the result of not applying those rules of recovery, which I mentioned earlier, which allow you to really maximize neuroplasticity, because neuroplasticity, I believe, stops when your brain isn't exposed to anything which justifies to it that it should change or improve what it's currently doing so that it can become better at what you're trying to do. Now, having said that, if you do learn how to apply these rules of recovery, then it's actually a different scenario, because instead of letting your brain go into this place called autopilot, you can actually make changes along the way as your brain improves, so that your recovery curve can look a little bit more like this, which is basically where you do an exercise, you improve for a bit, you reach autopilot, and then once you reach autopilot, you change what you're doing to go up a little bit higher, and then you reach autopilot again, and then you change what you're doing to go up to the next level, and then you just keep changing until you get to a place where you're satisfied with what you're doing. And that's what I believe is possible when you apply these rules of recovery, which I mentioned, to really maximize the amount of neuroplasticity which your brain is capable of, so that you're able to achieve your best possible recovery after stroke. So I just want to check in here with Ralph and Joe. Is that too medical or jargony? Does that all make sense? Because I haven't revised at all beforehand. I just put this together.
I think it makes excellent sense. I have a lot of it spurs me to go, as you intimated, much deeper. There's so much to this, but I think it's spot on.
Yeah. Okay. Great. Good. Good to hear.
Language,
Okay. So having said that, yeah, Ralph. Sorry, you were going to say something.
I was just going to say, using different language. I've always thought about it in terms of um, making sure that you challenge your brain, keep challenging your brain. That's basically, what you're talking about the enriched environment and plateauing. Yeah, I just found, I always thought, okay, it's time to mix it up. And I never really studied or anything, but basically came to the same conclusion. I guess probably because it's the way things work. So no, it's real clear.
I think it's
Yeah. Okay.
fluid too. It's fluid. It's going to be changing all the time because this is relatively new.
Yeah.
Yeah. Good to hear.
Well, it's
But
just sort of like they say, if standing on your leg or using your arm sends signals to your brain that you want to use it. Well, so does an
yeah.
enriched environment, and challenging your brain says, okay, we're in a situation, we're the hamster with a wheel. We got to, get on this stuff. So we
And
learn
and
better.
and and that wheel is going to be different for all of us.
Oh yeah.
And that's where we have to really get specific in terms of this environment, and consistently working some angle of our therapy in our lives.
Well, we've kind of talked about this before when we talked about learning how to read or pay attention to your body awareness. You know, because it's individualized. There A lot of people seem to think, there's a kind of well, William alluded to it, there's no, you know, one size fits all, do this exercise and you're good. And this graph that we're looking at indicates that you got to kind of be aware of when you're plateauing and know when to mix it up. So some of the other things that we've talked about here, like paying attention and body awareness, are very useful in terms of trying to maximize your plasticity. It's interesting because all the physical therapy I've been in, and I mentioned it the other day in, physical therapy 13 years out, I said something like, nobody's ever told me about neuroplasticity or talked about it. And you think that was an opportunity to talk about it, but they didn't really. They went, yeah, no, like we
Yeah.
don't.
Really?
Okay.
So
A
back
therapist that just acted that way, so cavalier.
I found that, and there are a good number of therapists that really, really care about their job and people, and there's some that, are a little more towards the babysitting side of things, for lack of a better term.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's
Okay, so
But we're getting away from William's topic, so back to you, William.
yeah, thanks guys. Okay, so just to paint this in context for those of you who are watching this later, this is basically what happens when you go through when you have therapy, which is paid for insurance, and so what happens when you have therapy through insurance is that the first couple of weeks you're basically going to be given an exercise and you're going to be improving quite a lot, but eventually you're going to reach a point where maybe you've ran out of blocks, and that's when insurance looks at stopping your therapy, and you're given a home exercise program for you to go home and do, and maybe you're doing the exact same exercises for years on end or for months on end until you get insurance to fund therapy again. And so you spend all this time in autopilot where none of your exercises have been changed, and your brain has basically become accustomed to what it's been exposed to because it's just doing the exact same thing every single week or every single day. But what I'm saying is that instead of this approach, if you can apply everything I've shared in the previous slides, you can make recovery look something like this. And the way you achieve a recovery curve like this is by really modifying your exercises whenever you recognize that you've come to a plateau, or whenever you notice that you're not seeing improvements as much as before. And in the years since I've had my stroke and through a ton of personal research, what I've discovered is that there's actually a formula you can use to have a look at the exercises you're doing so that you can identify how you can modify that exercise, so that you can get past this point where you're feeling like maybe you've gone on autopilot, and get back to and keep improving until you get to a point where you're satisfied with your recovery. And the formula I want to share with you guys today is basically the 4 components of any effective exercise in recovery after stroke. So in recovery after stroke, just from my experience of doing this and just doing a lot of personal research as well as my time at OT school, what I found that when it comes to exercise after stroke, there's really 4 components which make an exercise useful when it comes to recovery after stroke if you're trying to get something back. And these 4 components are the ones which I'm going to be sharing with you right now, and I'll be talking with you through each of them. So the first one is pretty much common sense, is that an exercise or any has to be challenging and repetitive. So I'm pretty sure everyone knows that, but I thought that it might be wise to include that anyway. Now, the second component of any effective exercise is that it has to be able to be modified with respect to your recovery. So in other words, there's no one and done exercise which you can just keep repeating and just keep seeing improvements. but rather an effective exercise is one which you can modify with respect to your brain's recovery so that you can keep improving and achieve something very similar to this. Now, the third component is that the exercise which you're trying to do in your recovery after stroke, it has to be somewhat related to what you want to do or what you used to do. So in other words, this might be integrating your exercise into daily tasks, like opening a fridge door, learning to open a fridge door and learning to relax your grasp so that you can actually let go of the fridge door and start of instead of holding on because of spasticity or muscle tightness. And the fourth component is that any effect, some sort of idea or some sort of feedback that you're doing that exercise correctly. So going back to the fridge door, the way you know that you're succeeding at that exercise is because you can actually see that rather than holding on to the fridge door and not being able to let go. A sign of improvement would be if you woke up maybe a week later after a lot of practice and you notice that you were able to let go of the fridge door for the first time instead of just clinging onto it. So, and this is probably the most important one found in my experience of helping to coach stroke survivors, is that most of the time when a plateau happens or when people reach a point where they're noticing that maybe they're not seeing as many improvements as before, or maybe their brain has gone into that autopilot mode, it's because this component, this feedback component has become a little bit too familiar to the brain. And also maybe challenging and also being able to be modified. So usually these three, I would say, 1, 2, and also 4. These are the main culprits behind this situation where you go into autopilot. And usually it's these 3 components which can be changed or reassessed so that you can get into a situation where you're able to get past autopilot and go up higher and higher in your recovery curve. So now that we've covered the 4 components of effective exercise, I wanted to share some examples of real life examples of this so that some of you who are watching this might have a better understanding of how it is that this works. So here in this slide, I've just shared some real life examples of your brain learning from neuroplasticity and really adapting itself. So the first one I want to share is just having a cold shower. And if any one of you have ever tried having a cold shower, you've probably noticed that the first time you took a cold shower, it was probably impossible to stand it. But after you got through that first time and you progressively practice the next time, next, your brain adapted itself to that condition. Or in other words, your brain adapted itself to its environment by really recalibrating itself so that it could become a lot better at taking cold showers. Or in other words, it basically became a lot more familiar with the feedback which it was getting, and it became accustomed to it. Now, the second one I wanted to share was skydiving. So a lot of people who skydive, they say that the scariest thing is actually jumping out of the plane. But they say that after they jump out of the plane the first time, they're able to do it over and over again. And this is because the brain is learning through neuroplasticity, or in other words, it's becoming more accustomed to that feedback and that challenge, and it's learning how to overcome that so that it can become a lot better at what it's trying to do. And also, again, we can see that it's somewhat related to what you want to or used to do, or maybe not used to, but want to do. So that motivation also gives your brain a lot more incentive to learn. And the last one I want to share is one of my personal favorites, which is learning how to reverse park a car. So for those of you who have ever learned to drive a car, you probably remember that the very first time you learned how to drive a car, going forward was very easy. And in other words, you weren't very scared of going forward. But when it came to reverse parking, the very first time you learnt it might have been really challenging because you had to figure out which way do you actually turn the wheel to actually get the car in the right position and between the lines. And if you ever try this for the first time, you might notice that you sucked or you were terrible at it for the first few times, but eventually your brain got it right that one time and it never forgot how to do it ever again. So in other words, your brain actually managed to receive some sort of feedback about what it feels like to turn the wheel correctly, and it never forgot. And therefore, your brain actually became a lot better at that particular skill, which you were trying to learn. In this case, learning how to reverse park a car. So when we look at all of these examples, you can see that they all have these components, even though they're not related to recovery after stroke. They are examples of how your brain learns with or without a stroke, and nothing really changes in how your brain learns in recovery after stroke, aside from your brain's ability to retain what it's already learnt. I don't think the learning changes that much. It's just being able to keep reminding your brain to practice what it's learnt how to do after stroke so that it becomes permanent. So what can we learn from all of these examples? So what we can learn from all of these examples is that in order to get to a situation where recovery looks something like this, and not like this where you suddenly see a big change and you just go on autopilot, exercises after stroke have to be exposed to frequent changes and also unpredictability. So what this means is that if you can expose your brain to an environment which is full of frequent changes and unpredictability, and also novelty, in other words, new sources of feedback, then what you can expect is that you can expect a recovery curve, something like this. This is the result of doing an exercise, changing it, introducing some sort of unpredictability so that your brain can go higher and higher up the recovery. So now that I've covered all of that, some of you are probably wondering how you can do this in recovery after stroke. So I thought that it might be a good idea to share some specific examples of common exercises which are typically done in recovery after stroke, and how you can modify these specific exercises so that you can really get your brain to really push the envelope when it comes to recovery after stroke. So the first exercise example I want to share is the bridge exercise, which is basically an exercise which you might have seen in physical therapy, which therapists might have suggested to you to help improve your gait and balance. So if you're just starting out in your recovery after stroke and you're just trying to do a bridge by yourself, more often than not, it's most likely that you're going to be using your non-effective leg to do most of the work when you're doing this exercise. And in most cases, this actually makes this exercise counterproductive because you're relying mainly on your non-affected leg, which means that your affected leg is not being exercised when you're doing this exercise. The objective of the bridge exercise is supposed to teach your brain how to balance weights between both your legs so that you can walk a lot better, and also distribute that weight across both legs a lot better when you're walking so that you can walk and get into more of a rhythm. So a way to modify this exercise so that you're able to do it correctly and you're able to really maximize neuroplasticity is to just simply introduce a ball and put it between your legs and encourage your brain to squeeze the ball and keep it between your legs while you're doing the bridge so that you're able to distribute equal weight between both legs when you're doing that exercise. And why this works is because no longer are you giving your brain room for error so that it can compensate with the non-affected leg when you're doing a standard bridge like this if you're not at that level yet. But rather, you're introducing a source of feedback to tell your brain whether or not you're doing the exercise correctly and whether or not you're distributing equal weight between both legs. If you drop the ball while you're doing this bridge exercise, then you know that you're putting more weight on your affected leg, on your non-affected leg, rather than your affected leg. So this is just one example of how to apply this rule to a common exercise in recovery after stroke, so that you can really maximize neuroplasticity and get past any situation where you might experience an autopilot in your recovery after stroke. And as we can see with this exercise, the reason why this works is because initially the exercise might have started off as challenging and repetitive, but there wasn't really some source of feedback in telling your brain whether or not you were using your non-affected leg more than your affected leg, because you can't see your legs when you're in that position. But when we introduce the ball to the equation, what we're doing is we're giving our brain some sort of feedback. We're also modifying the exercise, and we're also making it a little bit more challenging. We will leave out some. It is somewhat related to what you used to do, but because you are performing the exercise while in a lying down position and you're putting weight on both legs. But as you can see, when we modified that exercise, it was mainly the first two and also the last component which we modified so that we could get the most out of that exercise, so that the brain didn't go into autopilot mode. Okay, so does that make sense, Ralph and Joe?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Absolutely.
So that's just one of the many examples which I want to share. And now the next example which I want to share is one we've discussed quite a lot in the last couple of weeks with the roadmap. And this is one I designed myself, which is pretty much thinking about the way you go upstairs and also get in and out of a bathtub. And the reason why I designed this exercise was because usually in physical therapy, they encourage you to go upstairs with your stronger leg first. And the reason why this happens is because when you're starting out in your recovery after stroke, quite often your affected leg isn't strong enough to support the weight of your body. But by just simply switching up which leg you go upstairs with first, what you can do is you can encourage your brain to put more weight on that leg. So in other words, rather than going upstairs with your non-affected leg, I would encourage that you go upstairs with your affected leg as well some of the time, to really give your brain a sense of what it feels like to put weight through the non-affected leg rather than relying on the affected leg, rather than relying on the non-affected leg in a task or something which you would have done before you had your stroke. But that's only going to work for a bit of time before you get to a point where you get to autopilot. So once you get to autopilot and you feel like your balance and your gait has improved, then you're going to want to apply what your brain has learned to daily life and do activities such as getting into a bathtub. As you can see in this picture, the leg which you enter a bathtub with first is usually the leg which is going to bear the most weight of your body. And this is a super advanced exercise which I don't recommend to everyone to do. It's only a suggestion of how to improve an exercise, it's only a suggestion on how to improve an exercise when you notice that maybe things have become a little bit too easy and you want to actually apply it to daily life. Because I'm just assuming that everyone watching this wants to eventually stop doing exercises in the clinic, but rather apply what their brain has learned from exercises into daily life and actually start using it. So this is just another example of how to actually modify an exercise so that you can maximize the amount of neuroplasticity you get out of it, and eventually apply it to daily life. And as we can see, this modification follows the exact same rules, which we went over here. Going upstairs with the non-affected leg every time initially, it can become a little bit too repetitive and no longer pose a challenge, because you're just teaching the brain to use the good side all the time. But by switching up the legs and using the affected leg instead, what you're doing is you're giving the brain different source of feedback, and you're also making the exercise a lot closer to something which you used to do before you had your stroke, and you're also modifying it at the same time. And similarly with the bathtub, what we're doing is we're applying it straight to real life. We've reached a point where the exercise has no longer become challenging and it's become a little bit too repetitive, and we're just going straight to relating it to real life, and we're giving our brain real life feedback, which is even better than just synthetic feedback, which we might have saw with the ball and the bridge exercise. So this is just another example of another way you can modify an exercise so that you can really maximize the amount of neuroplasticity which your brain is capable of. And there are plenty of other examples to come. The next one I just want to share is obviously electrical stimulation. So a lot of the people watching this might have had experience with electrical stimulation. For those of you who have never heard of it before, it's basically using electrodes to stimulate muscles on your arm or on your leg to teach your brain how to send signals to your hand or your leg like it used to before stroke. And the reason why electrical stimulation works is because electrical stimulation, it fulfills all of those 4 key components which I discussed earlier. What electrical stimulation does is initially it can present as a challenge, and it's also repetitive. And it also can be modified. Not only does it fulfill these 2 rules, but it also gives your brain some sort of feedback in that you're able to see your hand or your leg contract when the machine is on and it's sending those electrical signals through. And it's also somewhat related to what you want to or used to do. As you can see in this example, where we're using electrical stimulation to open up the hand. And I just want to share another final exercise, another final way of modifying an exercise, which is one I designed myself, which is basically using a hole puncher to encourage your brain how to teach itself how to relax a grasp after stroke. And the reason why this works is because the resistance offered by the hole puncher actually acts as a spring to help open your fingers once you press down on it. Some of the people in my group have personally messaged me telling me that this has been useful in learning how to relax the grip or learning how to grip after stroke. So I thought I would include it here because this is for those of you who have heard of SaboFlex, this is a very cheap, economical $7 version of it, which I believe is a way of, I guess, maximizing neuroplasticity because what you're doing is you're fulfilling those 4 components of effective exercise, and you are providing your brain with a different sort of feedback in that you're letting the spring from the hole punch show your brain what it feels like to relax your fingers, and it also can be a little bit challenging and repetitive. It's also somewhat related to something which you used to do or wanted to do. You can see that using the hole puncher. You can see that by using the hole puncher that you're able to see what it feels like and looks like to open your hand and close it at the same time as well. So that's basically the last one of the that's basically another example I want to share. And the final example I want to share was just changing up your environment and where you do your exercise. So if you're stuck at home because of the coronavirus pandemic and you're just practicing walking around the home, I would encourage you to walk outdoors instead. And the reason why I encourage you to walk outdoors is because when you're walking outdoors, the terrain and the hilly areas are a lot more stimulating to your brain than just walking inside your home where it's very familiar. Especially the hills and the terrain, they can actually challenge your brain to turn on the muscles, which it probably wasn't turning on after your stroke when you were doing traditional physical therapy exercise. And here we can see there's also stairs as well. And I've had a few of my clients walk outdoors, and they've also reported that by doing this, it actually allowed them to walk a lot better, walk a lot better because of the added challenge and the different environment they were performing their walking in. And having said that, I just want to add another thing which you can do to maximize neuroplasticity. It's this idea which is called brain priming. And I'm not sure, and I mean, I just wanted to run it by Ralph and Joe. Have you guys heard of it?
Brain what?
It's called brain priming.
Brain prime, Prime.
Yeah, Priming.
Oh, I never heard of that. Brain
Yeah.
priming.
So I just want to introduce this last idea of maximizing neuroplasticity for your brain. And it's this idea, like I mentioned to Ralph and Joe, its scientific term is called brain priming, Priming. And basically it's this idea that if you do exercises in a specific approach, you can actually warm up your brain to learn things a lot quicker. So if you've ever watched sports like basketball, you might have noticed that after athletes have warmed up, they're actually able to perform things a lot better. And likewise in sports, you can also do this in recovery after stroke. So what this means is that in recovery after stroke, studies have shown that if you do maybe 30 minutes of outdoor walking, what happens is that after those 30 minutes of outdoor walking, your brain actually releases these chemicals, which allows it to learn skills or new things a lot quicker. So in recovery after stroke, another way of maximizing neuroplasticity, or an advanced way of maximizing neuroplasticity, is to actually do specific things to warm up your brain to learn new things in recovery after stroke. And what I would suggest is that whenever you're doing your exercises in recovery after stroke, one thing you can do is you can go outdoors for a 30-minute walk, because doing a 30-minute quick walk, what it actually does is it actually releases chemicals in your brain, which allow it to get warmed up to learn new movements and things a lot quicker. And these chemicals are called neurotrophins. And it's the same chemicals which are released, and it's the same. And yeah, so basically these chemicals are called neurotrophins, and they basically allow your brain to learn things a lot quicker. Having said that, another example of this is simply to drink a cup of coffee before you do your exercise. And the reason why I recommend this is because a lot of you might have heard that coffee allowed you to work a lot more efficiently. That coffee contains dopamine. So one thing I've had some of my clients do is to have a cup of coffee before they do their exercise, so that they can actually warm up their brain to learn things a lot quicker. Because likewise, before stroke, when some of you might have drank coffee to help you do your work a lot more efficiently, it also works in recovery. It also has some evidence in recovery after stroke because coffee contains dopamine, which allows your brain to not only learn things a lot quicker, but also concentrate a lot more, especially when it comes to things like exercises in your stroke exercise routine. So this is just another super advanced thing you can do to really maximize your plasticity, alongside with modifying your exercises as you go along in your recovery after stroke to really get the most out of your recovery. And I think that I should end on that because there's not really much else to cover unless we want this presentation to go on for 3 or 4 hours. But those are basically, this is basically some of the things which I know of, which you can do to really maximize the amount of neuroplasticity which your brain is capable of, so that rather than experiencing a situation of recovery where you're getting to a place where you're going on autopilot or you're getting to a plateau, you're able to modify things as you go using a brain prime or warming up the brain as required so that you can learn things a lot quicker and continue to make gains in your recovery until you get to a point where you're satisfied with your recovery after stroke. So that being said, I just want to open up for discussion with Ralph and Joe, as I'm sure there are other exercise ideas which might have popped up during the time I was presenting, which we can have a discussion about. We're all stroke survivors who have innovated in some way or some form in our own journey, and I'm sure that we can share other things which we've done to really maximize plasticity.
Does it work with decaf?
Actually, a client of mine asked that, and I said no. Just go with caffeinated. I personally haven't tried with decaf. I'll just go with caffeinated.
What if you can't? I'm not a big fan of caffeine post-stroke. It bothers me. So I just
Well, I mean, in that case, if you can't tolerate coffee, then I mean there are other alternatives such as green tea. Green tea is also a good one, which also helps in reducing inflammation in the brain, I think, and it also helps with learning as well.
Also has caffeine to a lesser degree.
Yeah, I mean, it's well, in that case, if caffeine isn't your cup of tea, no pun intended, you can always resort to warming up your brain to exercise by going outdoors for a quick walk before you actually do your exercise, which is something which some of the people I've coached have found to be beneficial.
I was curious. I did not know there was caffeine in green tea.
Oh yeah.
I think there's caffeine in green tea.
Is there a lot?
No, there's not. It's not anywhere near a cup of coffee.
Oh, okay. Because
so I'll stop sharing now.
Summer, I drink a lot of tea, but anyway, I just wanted to say, I think that going back to the very beginning of your presentation, William, where you listed the 4 points, and the exercise factor for me is a little previous to that. I think the stroke survivor has to understand this is like nothing they have ever experienced before in their life. I think that message is missing. That's important, and it's something that will groom them to prepare for what therapy lies ahead. And that therapy is not going to be involved anything like they're used to. It's not a pulled muscle. It's not a ruptured hamstring. It's not a broken bone. It's a stroke. And so just erase everything from your mind. Nothing is what it seems. You are going to be in charge of this so-called recovery. And here's why. And blah, blah. Start off with therapy because you know nothing. You work with the occupational, physical, speech, and whatnot. And you start to understand the principles. Now you can branch off and get your own therapy going, because eventually that's what we all end up with is ourselves.
Yeah, of course, definitely. I mean, like I said, mindset plays a huge role.
That's a huge component. The psychological component is massive, 95%.
Yeah, I mean, I've talked to stroke survivors and they've told me that, they live in the hopes that things will get better over time. Or they say things like, it's been 4 years, my hand still hasn't woken up. And it doesn't happen that way unless you give your brain that source of feedback, which justifies to it to actually look at actually sending signals to the arm or the hand, whether this be using electrical stimulation or some of the exercises I shared in that
Right.
presentation.
Also, one thing that helped me was mirror. A mirror has done so much help for me with respect to making my brain really work to where I, like Ralph said, he zap his brain. I get done with that and I'm like, oh man, that's it. I'm done. I'm washed
Yeah.
out.
Is this mirror box therapy?
Yeah.
No, not mirror box, just
No,
using
not just mirror, not mirror
Yeah,
box
mirrors
therapy.
is a really effective one, because if you look at mirrors, it gives you your brain that source of feedback,
Absolutely. Like I brush my
of what
teeth
you're doing correctly and not doing correctly.
right, pick things up. I wash myself in the mirror and whatever I'm doing, I use the mirror whenever I can, and especially like accidentally in the pool. We were talking about pool therapy. I accidentally saw the reflection on the pool house door, and I went, "Hey, there's a mirror right there." So when I was doing my therapy, I could watch myself, which helped me tremendously. And again, not only to do my exercise and my therapy more effectively, but to give my brain feedback as I was doing it.
Yeah, exactly. And that feedback helped, right?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So we can see the feedback is a huge factor, like, because you know that you're doing something right,
Yeah.
um, in recovery after stroke. Because if it wasn't for the feedback, then you could just be in recovery after stroke, just twiddling your thumbs and just hoping that things might happen. But I think if you can see it happening, then it can make you more motivated to actually continue. Um,
Oh,
yeah,
that's a principle right there that will give you the motivation for your next day. Is when you've accomplished something in that day, use that to motivate you for tomorrow.
yeah, exactly. And that's why I put that in the formula, was because the feedback is just so important. Otherwise, you could just be doing exercise for years on end.
Lost you there, William.
Oh yeah, it says my connection's unstable. Am I
Oh.
still here?
Now you're back. Now you're froze again. Now you're back.
Yeah. It's the internet. It's it's been raining a lot in the last couple of days. It just messes up the net.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, but yeah, I mean, like you were saying, it's that feedback which is really important. Otherwise, you could just be doing an exercise, thinking that you're improving, but you're actually confusing activity over achievement. Um, you're just doing it to convince yourself that you're doing something, but maybe it's not effective.
In a way, this verifies what Eugene Sandow said about exercise in the late 1800s when he wrote his book. And he said that if you exercise, if you're working out or whatever, and you're not engaged with what you're doing mentally, psychologically, it's useless. Your body will not respond. And so
Yeah,
Back to
that's
the
right.
this sort of proves that.
back to the rich environment. I found mirrors real handy for I did my symmetry exercises in front of them,
Yeah,
and I noticed. I guess I started them inside with a mirror, but I had my stroke in the springtime. And I like being outside on the deck, and I just used, like you were saying, in the pool. You could see yourself in a sliding glass door or something. I stood in front of the sliding glass doors and used them like a mirror for
yeah,
outside.
yeah. And I mean, even asking your therapist if they can see any improvements is another source of enriched environments, because on a day-to-day basis, you're probably not going to notice changes. But I think for a stroke survivor just starting out, if you're seeing your therapist once a week and you ask them if you're walking a lot better the next week and they tell you you are, then it gives you more motivation to keep doing it. That neuroplasticity is real.
Yeah. Yeah.
Also use mirrors for like having people when they're walking, let them walk towards the mirror and let them see themselves. Because a mirror gives you feedback on the fact you're doing it right, Joe. I think that's why you're, running out of brain, because you're using the mirror to make sure you're doing it right, and doing it right takes more brain than doing it wrong. Because
Right.
Yeah.
if you're lazy brained and sloppy, you're not using near as much brain as if you're focused and concentrating on form.
Yeah, it's very, very observant. That's exactly what that is. That's exactly what is going on there. And in a way, I felt good because I thought, man, that was a good one, because it sort of hit me like a hard set, like one more, and oh,
I know, I get you. So what you're saying is that, when you push yourself like that to where you feel like that,
oh
then
yeah,
you're getting some feedback on a psychological level, which says, I must be hitting it. I must be doing
there it
good.
is.
This is good
Exactly.
for me. I want to come back tomorrow and do some more. Yeah.
That's exactly what it is, and it's refreshing because now I'm becoming aware of just how exhausted I am, or if I can do some more, if I shouldn't, if I just rest. I don't push myself like I used to, but man, those moments are like, yeah, that's good, man.
Well, another thing about the mirror is if I'm a big believer in form, as is William, as are you, in form over anything. And I also think when something falls apart, it's time to stop. No point doing any bad ones, repeats.
Yeah,
So
that's right.
a mirror will help you with that.
Yep, yep.
Yeah,
And
because your brain naturally wants to take the lazy way out once it gets too tired. So you have to police it every single step of the way.
That's an
you have to,
insidious thing.
yeah, you have to trick it sometimes. You have to fool it,
Just
make it think.
override it.
Yeah, right, right.
Override.
Yeah.
That's it. There
Override.
you
Yeah, I do it
go.
all day long. No, no, no. We're gonna do it the right way.
Oh, right way. What difference does it make? We're going to get it done
Yeah,
one way or
like
another.
to tell you,
Yeah, exactly.
easy. We want to move on to the next task. Well, that's what your brain's doing all the time. It has a big job to do. So
Sure does.
it'll take, there's a reason it takes shortcuts. It's not to mess you up. It's because it has so much processing to do. Um, so
It's always looking for the most effective way to complete a task. And if
Yeah, but not the most practical.
exactly, or the most beneficial.
right, that's where override comes
Yeah.
in. So well, I guess we should wrap this up, eh, fellas?
Yeah,
Nice job,
yeah,
William.
cool.
Yeah, I was just to say, very
Yeah,
good job,
thanks.
William. It was well done and simple, straightforward. I think anybody can get it.